Welcome to the deep dive. We're going deep on a topic that's both fascinating and a little bit unnerving: fairness in data and algorithms. You know, algorithms are being used for everything these days, from approving loans to suggesting what to watch next. Well, what happens when these systems designed to be objective and efficient actually end up perpetuating existing inequalities? Our guide for this deep dive is an academic article called Where Fairness Fails. It's going to help us unpack how these systems can go awry even when there's no malicious intent. Think of this as your crash course in understanding how algorithms can impact fairness and why it matters so much.
Yeah, you've hit on something crucial there. The idea that these concerns about technology and discrimination aren't new. Going back to the 1950s and 60s when governments started using computers for record keeping, there were already worries about fairness and transparency. It's almost like history is rhyming just on a much larger scale now.
Right, because now we're talking big data. Algorithms sifting through mountains of information to make decisions that have real consequences. Like, I know targeted advertising uses my data to show me specific ads, but could that ever be used in a discriminatory way?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
And the answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. The Obama White House, for example, recognized the potential of big data while also raising concerns about its potential to worsen existing inequalities. They even issued reports about the potential for digital redlining, where algorithms could perpetuate discrimination in areas like housing or lending.
So even back then, they saw that potential for algorithms to be discriminatory. But what always gets me is when an algorithm does lead to an unfair outcome. Who's to blame? Is it always some programmer intentionally baking bias into the code?
That's where this idea of a bad actor can be misleading. We often try to pinpoint one individual or a group to hold responsible, like finding the biased programmer and calling it a day. But that often misses the bigger picture. Think of it like this. What if an algorithm is trained on data that already reflects societal biases, say in hiring practices? Even with the best intentions, the algorithm could learn and perpetuate those biases, leading to unfair outcomes.
So it's like, even if the programmer isn't consciously biased, the data itself can carry those biases, and the algorithm just blindly follows along.
Exactly. It's not always about intentional discrimination, but about systems inheriting and amplifying biases that are already present in our world. And that ties into the idea of unconscious bias, those hidden prejudices we all carry that can subtly influence our decisions. Let's say you're scrolling through resumes and unconsciously favor candidates from certain schools. An algorithm trained on your decisions might learn to do the same, even if you never explicitly told it to.
That's a little unsettling. It makes you realize how easily these biases can creep into algorithms, even without anyone deliberately trying to discriminate. So if it's not always about a bad actor, how do we even start to address these unconscious biases in algorithms?
That's a crucial question. And it's something where fairness sales digs into. What's interesting is that the article argues that even if we could magically erase all unconscious bias, we'd still have a problem. And that problem is the way we typically define fairness itself.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How can the definition of fairness be a problem? Isn't fairness just about treating everyone equally?
It seems straightforward, but the article argues that our traditional approaches to fairness often fall short because they fail to consider the overlapping identities and experiences of individuals. And that's where the concept of intersectionality comes in. It challenges us to move beyond single-axis thinking, where we categorize people based on one attribute like race or gender.
So instead of just saying, is this algorithm fair to men and women, we need to be asking, is it fair to Black women, to trans women, to women with disabilities?
Yeah.
Because those overlapping identities can create very different experiences.
Precisely. Kimberly Crenshaw, the legal scholar who coined the term intersectionality, illustrated this with a powerful example. She looked at employment discrimination cases involving Black women and found that they often faced unique challenges that weren't captured by laws focusing solely on race or gender.
So if we just focus on making an algorithm fair for men and women overall, we might miss how it could still disadvantage certain groups of women specifically.
Exactly. Intersectionality reminds us that people's lives are complex and that fairness can't be achieved by just ticking off boxes for gender and race. We need to consider the full spectrum of human experiences and how those experiences might be shaped by the algorithms we create.
It sounds like intersectionality adds a whole other layer of complexity to this conversation about fairness in algorithms. It's not just about men versus women or Black versus white. It's about how all these different aspects of a person's identity can combine to create unique experiences and challenges.
And what's fascinating here is that where fairness fails goes even deeper. arguing that our current understanding of what constitutes harm in the context of algorithms is too limited. We tend to focus on things like economic opportunities. Did someone get denied a loan or a job because of an algorithm? But the article pushes us to think about other forms of harm that might be less obvious, but just as significant.
Okay, so we're talking about harms that go beyond just money or access to resources.
Yeah.
What are some examples of those less obvious harms that algorithms might be causing?
The article gives a really striking example involving Google search results. Back in 2013, if you searched for black girls, the top results were often incredibly racist and degrading. Imagine the impact on a young black girl seeing those results, how it could shape her perception of herself and her place in the world. That's a powerful example of how algorithms can inflict what the article calls dignitary harms.
That's a really disturbing example. It makes you wonder how many other ways algorithms might be shaping our perceptions and reinforcing biases without us even realizing it. If we're not even aware of these harms, how can we possibly address them?
It's a huge challenge.
Sure.
And the article acknowledges that measuring these less tangible forms of harm is incredibly difficult. It's not as simple as looking at loan approval rates or hiring statistics. We need new frameworks and methodologies that can account for these more subtle but no less real forms of harm.
So it's almost like trying to measure the impact of a piece of art or music.
Yeah.
You can't just quantify it with numbers. You have to consider the emotional and psychological effects it has on people.
Exactly. It requires a shift in how we think about and evaluate algorithms. We need to move beyond just looking at inputs and outputs and consider the broader social and cultural context in which these systems are operating.
So it's not just about making sure everyone has equal access to opportunities. It's also about ensuring that algorithms aren't reinforcing harmful stereotypes or undermining people's sense of dignity and self-worth.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial point that where fairness fails, emphasizes. Data and algorithms don't just exist in some neutral vacuum. They're shaped by, and in turn, shape the complex web of social, political, and economic forces that make up our world.
That makes sense. We can't just look at algorithms in isolation. We have to consider the broader context in which they're created and used. So how do these broader forces influence the way algorithms are designed and deployed?
One way is through economic incentives. Many algorithms are designed to maximize profit or engagement, and that can lead to outcomes that prioritize certain groups or interests over others. Think about targeted advertising again. An algorithm designed to maximize ad revenue might end up showing certain types of ads to certain demographics, potentially reinforcing stereotypes or even leading to discrimination in housing or employment.
So even if the creators of an algorithm aren't intentionally trying to discriminate, the very goal of maximizing profit could unintentionally lead to discriminatory outcomes.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of considering not just the technical aspects of algorithms, but also the economic and political systems in which they operate.
And it's not just about advertising, right? Algorithms are being used in all sorts of areas now, including law enforcement and criminal justice. The stakes seem even higher in those contexts.
Absolutely. When algorithms are used in areas that can impact people's freedom or safety, even small errors or biases can have devastating consequences. And that's why the article argues that we need to be extremely cautious and deliberate when using algorithms in these high-stakes domains. We can't just assume that because a system is automated, it's somehow free from the biases that plague human decision-making.
So it's not enough to just focus on making the algorithms themselves fair. We also need to think about how they're being used and what safeguards are in place to prevent them from being used in ways that could harm people.
Exactly. And where fairness fails suggests that we need to move beyond this narrow conception of looking for a single bad actor when things go wrong. Instead, we need to consider the entire ecosystem in which algorithms operate, recognizing that unfair outcomes can arise from a complex interplay of factors, including the data used to train the algorithm, the design choices made by developers, and the broader social context in which the algorithm is deployed.
So it's like a web of interconnected factors, and just tweaking one part of the system might not solve the underlying problem. We need a more systemic approach.
Precisely. And that's why the article advocates for a more holistic and interdisciplinary approach to addressing these challenges. We need to bring together experts from fields like computer science, sociology, law, and ethics to develop a more nuanced understanding of how algorithms impact fairness and justice.
It's clear that we need a more holistic approach to address the challenges of fairness in algorithms, but all this talk about potential harms can be a bit daunting. Where fairness fails does a great job of laying out the problems, but does it offer any solutions? What can actually be done to create more equitable algorithms?
Well, it's not about throwing our hands up in despair. The article is a call to action, urging us to think critically and creatively about how we design, develop, and deploy algorithms. And it offers several concrete strategies for moving forward. One of the most crucial is the need for greater transparency and accountability.
So opening up that black box, so we can understand how algorithms are making decisions and what data they're using.
Precisely. Transparency can't just be about revealing the technical details of algorithms. It also means being upfront about the values and assumptions baked into these systems. Who benefits from these algorithms? Whose interests are being prioritized? These questions need to be addressed openly and honestly.
Transparency makes sense, but how do we actually hold these systems accountable? If an algorithm leads to an unfair outcome, what are the mechanisms for addressing that?
Accountability is a complex issue, and there's no easy answer. But one important step is to establish clear guidelines and regulations for the development and use of algorithms. Especially in areas like law enforcement or healthcare where the stakes are high, we also need to create avenues for individuals to challenge algorithmic decisions that they believe are unfair.
So not just making the algorithms themselves fairer, but also creating a fairer system for governing how they're used.
Exactly. And that requires involving a broader range of stakeholders in the conversation. We need to move beyond just the tech industry and bring together experts from fields like ethics law, social science, and most importantly, communities that are directly impacted by these technologies.
It's about recognizing that algorithms aren't just technical artifacts. They have real-world consequences, and we need a more inclusive and participatory approach to shaping their development and deployment.
Absolutely. And the article also emphasizes the importance of empowering individuals. We need to give people more information about how algorithms are being used and what data is being collected about them. This allows individuals to make informed choices and to advocate for greater fairness and transparency.
It's about giving people agency in a world that's increasingly driven by automated systems.
Exactly. And ultimately, it's about shifting our focus from simply mitigating harm to proactively creating a future where data and algorithms are used to advance social good. We can use these powerful tools to promote equality, to address systemic injustices, and to build a world that works for everyone, not just a select few.
That's an inspiring vision, and it's clear that it will require a concerted effort from all of us technologists, policymakers, researchers, and everyday citizens. But where fairness fails makes it clear that this isn't just a technical challenge. It's a societal challenge, and it demands our attention.
You've summed it up perfectly. We have a choice to make. We can either allow these powerful technologies to reinforce existing inequalities, or we can use them to build a more just and equitable world. The future isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the choices we make today.
Well, that's a powerful note to end on. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking exploration of the complex landscape of fairness in algorithms. And to our listeners, keep questioning, keep learning, and let's work together to ensure that algorithms are used to create a more just and equitable future for all.